The ship moved through the stars like a silent bird. Inside it were people from many places, some traveling for work, some for family, some for duty. The long rows of seats were almost full. Laughter, whispers, and tired sighs filled the air, but there was also something else. It was a tension that could be felt even without words. In the middle of this, a woman entered. She was different from the others. Her clothes were plain, her face quiet, but her presence made people uneasy. When she walked down the aisle, men and women turned their eyes away. No one wanted her near. People pulled their bags closer, some shifted in their seats, some even pretended to be asleep. It was clear. No one wanted her beside them. She moved slowly, her steps steady, but her eyes showed she felt the weight of every stare. Seat after seat remained closed to her. The rows seemed endless, and yet she found no welcome. Silence followed her, heavy and sharp, as though she carried with her something that others could not accept. Near the back of the ship, a young man watched. His name was Ethan. He was not rich, not powerful, just an engineer traveling for work. But he noticed her, saw the way people avoided her, the way she walked alone, even in a crowded space. There was no anger in him, only a quiet thought that this was not right. Ethan stood as she passed. He gave a small nod, nothing grand, nothing loud. It was simple, almost too simple, but it was enough. He moved his bag to the side and pointed at the empty seat beside him. The woman stopped. For a moment her face did not change, as if she was waiting for a trick, waiting for a laugh at her expense. But there was no trick. His eyes were calm, his gesture honest. She lowered herself into the seat beside him. The whispers of others grew louder. Some shook their heads. Some muttered to one another about how foolish he was, how dangerous it could be. But Ethan did not listen. He kept his eyes forward, calm, steady, like a stone in the river that would not be moved. For a long while neither spoke. The sound of the ship filled the silence between them, the hum of the engines, the soft voices of people further away. The woman kept her hands folded in her lap. Ethan leaned back in his seat, not staring at her, not questioning her, just letting her be. At last, she looked at him. Her voice was quiet, almost unsure, but it carried weight. She asked him softly why he had chosen to sit with her when no one else would. Ethan thought for a moment before he answered. His words were simple. He said that no one should be left alone because of fear. He said that a seat is just a seat, but the choice to share it is something more. The woman looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes softened, and though she did not smile, something in her face changed. It was as if a wall had been lowered, just slightly, just enough to let a little light in. Around them, the stares and whispers continued. But Ethan did not mind. He had made his choice, and he would not move. The ship carried on through the stars, and in the quiet space of one shared row, something new began. It was small, unnoticed by most, but it was the start of something that would reach far beyond that single journey. The ship moved on through the endless dark. Hours passed, but for the two sitting quietly together, time felt different. The young man Ethan kept his calm manner. He did not ask questions, and he did not look at the woman too closely. He gave her the space to rest, but his presence was steady. It was the kind of silence that did not press or push, only waited. The woman sat with her hands folded tight. She could feel the eyes of others. Even when she looked down, she knew they were staring. The weight of their judgment hung in the air, but beside her, Ethan did not judge. He sat as if it were the most natural thing in the world to share a seat with her. That quiet act began to ease the storm inside her, though she did not show it. After a long while, Ethan reached into his bag. He pulled out a small flask of water, turned to her and offered it with a calm hand. She hesitated. No one had offered her anything in a long time. She looked at the flask, then at him. His eyes were steady, not forcing, not demanding. Slowly she accepted it. She took a sip, her throat dry, and then handed it back. She gave the smallest nod of thanks. Ethan only gave a soft smile and set the flask down. It was a small moment, but it meant more than words could carry. Sometime they sat like that. The woman found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. His clothes were simple, his hands rough with work. He did not wear the sharp uniform some of the others had. He was ordinary, yet he did not act like the others who had turned away from her. His calmness puzzled her, and it gave her a quiet sense of safety. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, careful, as though the words had been locked away for too long. She told him her name. She had not spoken it aloud in many days, and even as she said it, it felt strange on her tongue. Ethan listened without interrupting. She finished, he nodded, and said her name back to her, clear and respectful, as if it mattered. To her it did. She did not plan to say more, but something about his silence invited her to share. She began to tell him a little of her story. Not everything, not the deepest parts, but enough to let him know she was more than what others saw. She spoke of where she had come from, of the place she had once called home, of how it had been taken from her. She spoke of betrayal, of the weight of running, of the loneliness that came with exile. Her words trembled at times, but she did not stop. Ethan listened, did not rush her, and he did not ask for more than she offered. He only nodded now and then, showing he understood. His face showed no fear, no scorn. Looked at her with the same steady calm that he had shown from the beginning. For the first time in a long time, she felt her words had reached someone. The hours stretched on, but the seat they shared felt different now. The silence was no longer heavy. It was lighter, filled with a kind of trust that had not been there before. Around them, whispers still floated. Some passengers glanced back, muttering under their breath about secrets and danger. A few even shook their heads, warning one another about sitting too close to her. But Ethan did not move, and the woman no longer cared so much about the voices. Their quiet corner had become something else, something stronger than the scorn of others. As the ship sailed through the stars, the bond between them began to take shape. It was fragile, like glass, but it was real. It was built not with grand gestures, but with small acts of respect. A seat shared, a flask of water, a name spoken without judgment. These simple things, unnoticed by most, carried more weight than all the stares and whispers around them. For the first time in many days, the woman felt that she was not entirely alone. And for Ethan, sitting beside her felt less like a choice and more like the only thing he could have done. The ship kept moving through the stars, and the hours turned slower. Whispers began to move through the rows. Some passengers leaned close to one another, speaking in low voices. Their eyes turned again and again to the woman who sat quietly beside Ethan. Rumors spread like fire in dry grass. Some said she was dangerous. Others claimed she carried secrets that could bring trouble to them all. No one knew for sure, but fear needed no proof. Ethan noticed the way people looked at them. Could hear fragments of the whispers, sharp words like poison drifting through the air. Still, he did not move. He sat steady beside her, his calm presence a wall against the storm of voices around them. The woman kept her head low, but he saw the way her hands tightened in her lap, the way her shoulders pulled in as if to make herself smaller. It did not take long before a group of men decided to act. They were broad-shouldered and spoke with rough voices. They moved down the aisle, their eyes fixed on Ethan. One of them stopped at his row and leaned forward, his voice heavy with scorn. He told Ethan he was making a mistake, that no one else would sit beside her for a reason. He laughed, saying that Ethan was foolish for thinking he was different. The woman kept silent, her eyes on the floor, but Ethan looked up at them. His voice was steady. He said he would not move. The man's smile faded, and for a moment the air grew tense. The others behind him muttered, warning him to leave before trouble followed. But Ethan did not move. He simply sat firm, his eyes clear, his words calm. At last, with a sneer, the men walked away, shaking their heads, their whispers even louder than before. When they were gone, the woman finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost hidden under the hum of the ship. She asked why he stayed when the others warned him not to. Ethan turned to her, and for a moment he searched for the right words. Then he told her the truth. He said that people could be wrong. He said that fear made them blind. He said that no one deserved to sit alone because of shadows cast by others. Her eyes lifted, and for the first time, he saw the weight of her past reflected there. She told him more of her story, piece by piece. She spoke of a home once filled with light, of halls where she had walked as someone important, where her voice had carried meaning. She spoke of betrayal, of men who had once sworn loyalty and then turned against her, of nights filled with flight and fear. She spoke of the heavy crown that had been torn from her, and of the people who still looked to her, even when she was far away. Ethan listened to it all. His eyes never wavered, his hands never shifted in doubt. He sat as if her story was not strange, but something he understood, something that deserved to be heard. The woman's voice shook at times, but she found strength in his steady silence. For the first time in many days, her words were not wasted. They were not swallowed by empty air, but carried into the ears of someone who cared. Around them, the whispers did not stop. Some grew sharper, some colder, but something else began to happen. A few passengers watched Ethan with new eyes. They saw his quiet defiance, the way he sat against the current of scorn. They did not speak it aloud, but a thought took root in their minds. If one person could choose kindness, then perhaps they had been wrong to choose fear. The woman felt this change too, faint but real. She no longer kept her head so low. She still carried the weight of exile, the pain of betrayal. But now she also carried the knowledge that one person had chosen to see her as more than the whispers claimed. That single choice began to grow into something larger, something that even the harsh voices around them could not silence. The ship sailed on through the dark, carrying many secrets, but in that quiet corner of one row, a fragile trust grew stronger. Ethan had made his choice, and it was not to be moved by fear. The woman had shared her truth, and it had been heard. Though danger still lingered in the shadows of her past, she felt, for the first time in a long while, that she was not standing alone against it. The long ship drifted through the silent dark, but peace did not last. Deep in the night cycle, the lights flickered and alarms began to sound. A warning voice filled the hallways, calling all passengers to stay in their seats. The calm journey turned into fear as the sound of heavy steps and breaking metal came from the outer halls. Trouble had found them. Men armed with strange weapons forced their way inside. They were not part of the crew, and it was clear they had come with a purpose. Their eyes searched the rows, hunting for someone. Passengers ducked down, mothers held children close, and men tried to shield their families. The attackers pushed forward without care. Their voices were sharp, ordering everyone to stay silent. Ethan understood at once. They had not come for the ship or for riches. They'd come for her, the quiet woman sitting beside him. She froze as their steps grew closer. Her hands trembled in her lap, but her face stayed calm, though he could see the fear in her eyes. Ethan leaned closer and whispered that she must stay low. She nodded once, her breath steady but thin. The armed men moved down the aisle, their eyes searching each row. Ethan's mind raced. He had no weapon, no training, but he had his hands, his skills, and his will. He thought fast. He knew the ship's layout, the doors, the power lines, the systems built into every wall. That knowledge became his weapon. As the men stepped closer, Ethan stood. Passengers gasped. Some even tried to pull him down, but he shook them off. He walked out into the aisle, blocking their path. The leader of the men sneered and demanded to know where she was. Ethan said nothing. Silence was enough to hold their attention. Behind his still face, his mind was working. He knew he had to act, and he knew it had to be quick. When the leader grew angry and pushed forward, Ethan struck, grabbed the nearest panel on the wall, ripped it open, and pulled at the wires with steady hands. The ship groaned as doors slid closed, trapping the attackers in sections of the aisle. Passengers screamed, some cried out, but Ethan kept his focus. In the sudden dark, he turned to her and pulled her toward the back rows. The men shouted, banging on the locked doors, firing into the air. Red emergency lights came on, painting the room in dim glow. Ethan guided her through the narrow path, his heart racing but his step steady. A few passengers, inspired by his courage, stood and began to block the way, slowing the attackers who tried to force the doors open again. Fear was still strong, but now it was mixed with something new, a spark of bravery. The woman followed Ethan, her steps quick but sure. At one turn, they were cornered by two men who had broken through another door. Ethan pushed her behind him and grabbed a loose pipe from under a seat. The men laughed at his weak weapon, but Ethan did not back down. He swung with all his strength, blocking one strike, then another. The fight was rough, clumsy, but his will carried him through. With help from two passengers who rushed in, the men were knocked aside, and the path was clear. Breathing hard, Ethan pressed forward, leading her deeper into the ship. He rerouted them through side halls, pulling more panels, locking more doors, confusing the attackers who chased them. The woman stayed close, her eyes fixed on him, her trust growing with every step. She had lived through betrayal, but here was a man who risked himself without question. Finally, they reached a storage area near the rear of the ship. Ethan sealed the doors behind them and set the locks. He sank to the floor, his arms heavy, his breath rough, but his eyes still sharp. She knelt beside him, her face calm, but filled with something new. It was not fear. It was respect, and it was hope. The ship still shook with noise, the danger not yet gone. But in that small corner, the tide had shifted. One man had stood against the storm, others had followed. The whispers of fear that once ruled the ship were being replaced by the first signs of courage. The fight was not over, but Ethan had shown that even an ordinary man could become the wall, that danger could not pass. The storage room was dim and quiet, except for the sound of their breathing. Ethan leaned against the wall, his hands still shaking from the fight. The woman sat near him, her eyes fixed on the locked door. The ship still carried the noise of chaos, but for a brief moment, they had found a small corner of safety. Ethan spoke softly, telling her they could not stay hidden for long. The men would search every part of the ship until they found her. She nodded. She knew he was right, but she also knew he had given her more than time. He had shown her that she was not alone anymore. That thought gave her strength she had not felt in many days. The sound of heavy steps returned, closer this time. The men had broken through another section and were spreading across the ship. The passengers were no longer only hiding. Some had begun to fight back, blocking doors, throwing whatever they could find, slowing the attackers at every turn. Fear was still there, but now courage had taken root. Ethan's stand had sparked something inside them, something that could not be undone. Ethan stood and reached for her hand. She looked at him for a long moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was steady, a promise without words. He told her they had to reach the control room. If they could lock the main systems, the attackers would lose their chance to take her. She agreed, and together they moved out of the storage room. The halls were filled with red light and the sound of alarms. Smoke drifted from broken panels, and the floor shook under their steps. At one corner, a group of passengers stood with pipes and tools ready to block the attackers again. They stepped aside for Ethan and the woman, their eyes showing respect. They did not speak, but the meaning was clear. They trusted him. The path to the control room was not easy. Twice they were forced to duck into side halls as armed men passed. Once, they had to fight again, Ethan using his pipe and quick hands to drive the men back. The woman stayed close, her eyes sharp, her steps sure. She was no longer only a figure of silence. She was ready to stand if needed, her strength quiet but strong. At last, they reached the control room. The door was sealed, but Ethan knew how to open it. His hands worked quickly on the panel, sparks flying as he pulled wires and reset the locks. The door slid open, and they rushed inside. He sealed it behind them and turned to the main system. His fingers moved with speed, pressing commands, rerouting power, shutting down sections of the ship where the attackers were trapped. The woman watched as he worked, her heart steadying with each move he made. At last, the alarm shifted. The sound of heavy locks echoed through the halls. The attackers were sealed away, their path cut off. The ship grew calmer, the danger finally breaking apart. For the first time since the alarms began, silence spread through the corridors. Ethan leaned back from the controls, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He looked at her, and she looked back at him. No words were needed, but still he spoke. He told her that she was safe now, that the fight was over for this night. She nodded, her eyes softer than before. In her look was more than thanks. It was trust, respect, and something stronger. When the crew finally arrived to secure the attackers, they found passengers standing together, no longer divided by fear. They saw Ethan beside the woman, and they understood who had led the change. The same people who once pulled away from her now looked with awe. Their whispers had turned into silence, and their silence had turned into respect. Later, when calm returned, Ethan sat again in the same row where it had all begun. The woman sat beside him, her hands no longer folded in fear but resting with quiet strength. She told him softly that she could not return to her old life yet, but she would not run alone anymore. He nodded and said he would walk with her, wherever her path led. It was not a grand promise spoken to the stars, only a simple vow between two people who had faced the storm together. The ship moved on through the endless dark, carrying many souls, but among them was a bond that had been forged in fire. One man had chosen to sit where no one else would, and from that small choice grew something greater than anyone had expected. What began with one seat quietly shared had become the spark of change, a light strong enough to outshine fear,